Welcome back everyone. Session 3, Assertions, Test Structure and Hooks. If Session 2 was about finding things on the page and interacting with them, today is about writing tests that are actually trustworthy and organized. We're going to look at how Playwright's assertions really work under the hood, how to group tests together sensibly, how to remove duplicated setup with hooks, and a proper strategy for test data instead of just hard coding everything. By the end of today, your tests are going to stop looking like a pile of individual scripts and start looking like an actual organized suite. Quick recap of Session 2. We covered locators, getByRole, and the rest of the built-in locators, chaining and filtering, first and or, the core actions like click and fill, and auto weighting versus explicit weights. Today's agenda, 5 things: web-first assertions and soft assertions, test.describe and the order hooks actually run in, annotations, skip only fixme, plus test.step for cleaner reports, tagging tests and running them selectively by tag, and test data strategy, hard-coded values versus fixtures versus generated data. Let's start with a concept that's genuinely core to how Playwright avoids flakiness, the web-first assertion. A web-first assertion doesn't check the DOM just once. It keeps rechecking the condition over and over until it either passes or it hits the timeout. Here's what that looks like. Await expect page.getByText order confirmed dot toBeVisible. 2 things fall out of that polling behavior. First, it retries automatically. You never need to add a wait before an assertion like this, because waiting is baked directly into the assertion itself. And second, it matches how real UIs actually behave. It waits for animations to finish, for network responses to land, for re-renders to settle, all before it gives up and fails. Let's look at the toolbox of web-first assertions you'll use constantly. toBeVisible checks that an element is visible on the page. toHaveText checks that an element's text content matches what you expect. toHaveValue checks an input or text area's current value. toHaveURL checks that the page's URL matches a string or a regular expression. toHaveCount checks the number of elements a locator currently matches. toBeEnabled and toBeDisabled checks an element's enabled state. And toHaveScreenshot, this one's for visual regression testing, which we're going to cover properly in Session 8. It's worth being really clear on the difference between a web-first assertion and what I'm calling a generic assertion, because they behave differently in a way that actually matters. Web-first, await expect locator dot toBeVisible. This targets a locator and it auto retries until it either passes or times out. Generic, expect response body.status dot toBe 200. This targets a plain JavaScript value and it's checked exactly once, immediately, with no retry at all. Here's the rule of thumb I'd give you. If the value is derived from the page itself, use a web-first assertion. If it's a plain JavaScript value, an API response, a number you calculated, use a generic one instead. Let's talk about soft assertions, because this solves a specific annoying problem. Here's the code. Await expect.soft page.getByTestID title dot toHaveText dashboard. Then another one for the subtitle. Then a comment, noting the test keeps going, even if either of those assertions above it actually failed. And then we go ahead and click a close button afterward. Here's the distinction. A regular expect throws immediately and stops the test dead the moment it fails. Expect.soft records that failure, but lets the test keep running past it. The test still ends up marked as failed overall. You're not losing that signal, but now you get to see every single issue on the page in one run. Instead of fixing one failure, rerunning, hitting the next failure, fixing that, rerunning again, and so on. This is genuinely great for checking several independent parts of a page in one test without an early exit hiding other real problems from you. Let's move into organizing tests. Test.describe is how you group related tests together. Here's an example. Test.describe checkout flow, and then inside it 3 separate tests, one for showing the order summary, one for applying a discount code, one for completing payment. Why bother with this? 3 reasons. It groups related tests under one shared, readable label that shows up nicely in your reports. It scopes hooks before each and after each to only that specific group rather than applying to your entire test suite. And you can actually nest these describe blocks for subgroupings within a larger feature area. Let's talk about hooks and specifically the order they actually run in, because this trips people up if you haven't seen it laid out clearly. Picture the sequence: before all, before each, test 1, after each, before each again, test 2, after each again, and finally after all. Before all and after all run exactly once for the whole file, or for the whole describe block if they're inside one. Before each and after each run around every single individual test. And here's a subtlety worth knowing. Nested describe blocks nest their hooks too. An outer before each runs before an inner before each. And an inner after each runs before the outer after each. So it's genuinely nested, like Russian dolls, not just stacked in file order. Let's see this in actual code. We've got test.describe, account settings. Inside it before all, which seeds a test user just once for that entire file. Then before each, which navigates to the login page, fills in an email, and clicks sign in. So every single test in this group starts already logged in. And then 2 actual tests, one for updating a display name, one for changing a password. Notice what just happened here. We removed the repeated login steps from both of those individual tests entirely. That's the whole point of hooks. Pull out the setup that's common to a group of tests and put it in exactly one place. A handful of annotations control how and whether a test actually runs. Test.skip. Don't run this test at all and it gets reported as skipped. Test.only. Run only this one test in the file, which is genuinely great for focused local debugging. Test.fixme marks a test as known broken. It gets skipped, but it stays tracked instead of just vanishing. And test.slow triples the timeout for a test you already know, tends to run slowly. One important warning here, and I want to really emphasize this one. Never commit test.only into your codebase. If that slips into a PR and merges, your CI will silently skip every single other test in that file, and probably nobody will notice until something important breaks in production without a test catching it. Let's look at test.step, which is about making your reports actually readable. Here's the code. Test. Checkout as a guest. Inside it, 4 separate test.step calls. Add item to cart, go to checkout, fill shipping details, complete payment. These steps show up as a collapsible tree inside the HTML report and inside the trace viewer too. So when something fails, it points you straight at the specific step that broke, rather than just telling you the whole test failed and leaving you to figure out where. This is especially valuable for long multi-part flows, checkout, onboarding, anything with several distinct stages, where the test failed alone genuinely isn't enough information to act on quickly. Let's talk about tagging, which is about selectively running subsets of your suite. Here's the syntax. Test. User can reset password with a tag of @smoke and then the test function, or test.describe checkout flow tagged @regression. 2 tags worth knowing as a starting convention. @smoke is small, fast set of tests covering your critical paths meant to run on every single commit. At regression, the full slower suite meant to run nightly or right before a release goes out. And to be clear, these tag names are just a convention, not something built into Playwright specifically. Pick whatever taxonomy actually fits your team. At Smoke, at a PI, at mobile, at Flaky, whatever makes sense for how you work. Once you've tagged things, here's how you actually run a subset. npx playwright test -- grep at -smoke runs only the tests tagged at smoke. npx playwright test -- grep invert at slow runs everything except the ones tagged at slow. A good pattern to adopt: wire an at smoke run into your pull request pipeline so every PR gets fast feedback, and wire a full at regression run into a nightly job. That gives you fast feedback on every single commit without ever sacrificing your overall coverage. Let's talk about where your test data actually comes from, because this affects reliability more than people expect. Hard-coded, fixed values baked directly into the test. Simple and completely deterministic, but brittle, especially if the application enforces uniqueness, like unique email addresses on sign-up. Fixtures, reusable setup through test.extend, which we'll cover properly in session 5. Consistent and shared cleanly across tests. This is really the Playwright native approach. Faker or generated data, randomized realistic data on every single run. Great for uniqueness and for hitting edge cases, but it does need seeding if you want the exact same run to be reproducible later. Let's see generated data in actual practice. Import faker from add faker -js/faker. Then inside a signup test, const email equals faker dot internet dot email. Const name equals faker dot person dot full name. Fill in the name field, fill in the email field, click create account. Why does this actually matter in practice? Generated emails avoid that classic user already exists collision you get on repeated runs, which honestly is one of the single most common causes of flaky signup tests I have seen across different teams. Let's put absolutely everything from today together into one complete, realistic example. Test.describe profile settings tagged at smoke. Before each, navigate to /profile. Then a test updates display name. We generate a fake name with faker, wrap the actual form, filling in a test.step called fill and submit the form. Then use expect.soft to check a saved message appears. And finally, a regular expect to confirm the display name field genuinely holds the new value. Everything we have covered today is present in this one file. Grouping, hooks, tagging, steps, soft assertions, generated data, and a regular web-first assertion at the very end for the assertion that actually matters most. Let's talk anti-patterns, because I want you to recognize these before they end up baked into your suite. One giant test, cramming an entire user journey into a single test, hides exactly which step actually failed when something breaks. Shared mutable state, tests that depend on execution order or on leftover state from a previous test, are flaky by design, not by accident. Assertions with no message context, a bad to be true, tells you absolutely nothing useful when it fails. Assert on the specific thing you actually care about instead. And committed dot only or dot skip. This silently disables coverage in CI without anyone necessarily noticing, sometimes for weeks. Your turn. 5 things. 1. Wrap session to's login and search tests inside a test.describe block. 2. Add a before each hook that handles navigation and login, and remove that duplication from the individual tests. 3. Break one of your existing tests into readable test.step calls. 4. Add an @smoke tag to your fastest, most critical test and actually run it using --grep. 5. Swap out one hard-coded value in your tests for data generated with @faker.js/faker. Let's recap. 5 things to hold on to. Web-first assertions poll and auto-retry. Generic expect calls check a value exactly once. Expect.soft surfaces every failure in a test, not just the very first one it hits. Test.describe plus hooks removes duplicate setup and makes your reports genuinely organized. Test.step and tags make large suites navigable and let you run exactly the subset you need at any given moment. And prefer fixtures or generated data over hard-coded values, specifically to avoid the flakiness that comes from data collisions. Next time, Session 4, Advanced UI Interactions. We are covering file upload and download, iframes, pop-ups and new tabs, native browser dialogues, drag and drop, and handling dynamic or lazy loaded content. This is where we tackle all the tricky, real-world UI scenarios that don't show up in a simple demo app, but absolutely show up in production applications. See you there. Any questions, please post in comments section.